Hey, everybody, and welcome to DBS Films Podcast. My name is Kellen. With me, as always, my brother Brendan, and together we make movies with DBS Films. Today, we're going to be talking about part 3 of The Haunting of the Murder House, which is set to be released this year. And we're going to break down basically the post-production process, give you guys a lot of tips when it comes to working with pickups, and also ensuring that you have, an easy edit. So that's something that I think we really want to dive into on this episode. But before we do, as always, be sure to take a look at all of our links online. Our Discord is by far the best place to hang out and join us. We have a lot of really cool things going on there, but also that is where we're able to work with our fans and make movies for our fans. That's where we get all of the feedback, and that's where we look to cast and get preferred casting as well. So be sure to take a look at those links online. Be sure to join us if you are interested. And as always, you can take a look at our movies there as well too. So, hopping into the post-production process, I think the big thing with this overall, filming of the Haunting of the Murder House coming off of the backs of the Girl in Cabin 13 is we're just a lot more confident in this process. And, one of the major things that we talked about in the Girl in Cabin 13 in the post-production process was having that editor's mindset. And really, I almost feel like everything we do in pre-production and everything you do in production is to set up to make your post-production as easy as possible. And that's mainly because, hey, if we have the editor's mindset, we're going to be trying to look after that whole process and make sure it's not a complete nightmare, especially after what we experienced with, some of the first projects and the Hateful Eight that we were working through. So, before we hop in, do you kind of want to talk about how, as we increase our process, I think it's only going to make more sense that realistically it should get easier as the process gets better once we finally do get into the post-production stage.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think number one, as you're completing more movies, you're getting better at just the process. Everything gets quicker. If you've solved problems before, you know how to solve them again. So, just going back through the murder house, there's a lot of audio issues that we had to clean up. There were some picture issues that we had to clean up. And there's also like some issues as far as like the windows were open or there's light coming through different areas that, were more technical fixes where I had to go back and Photoshop, pictures into the actual movie and then track them to make sure, the windows looked dark and there wasn't any light coming through. We had a lot of scenes where Kel was in the van and we're tracking the camera on a dolly across the frame. And when we would, record the camera onto the monitor that he's watching, the color was all messed up. So I had to actually put a different adjustment layer on that monitor. And these are just technical things that every single movie is gonna, you're gonna have to overcome them. But the process with Murder House and why we were able to get it out so quickly is we knew how to handle these problems, because we've handled them in the past. So I think number one, you're getting better. And number two, it's just, you have more reps, and when you do come to a problem, you know how to fix it. There's very few problems in this movie that I had no idea how to fix, which is, sped up our process. And I think a lot of new filmmakers, when they first get into post-production, they don't know how to fix these issues, and that can just, frustrate them. And then it takes a lot of time to go back and reverse engineer it. And if you can't do it yourself, then you have to outsource it, which once again, you're adding another person onto your timeline. So it's going to, expand your time frames, and it's just going to take longer to get out of post.
Yeah. Really it ends up being something where the biggest issue that comes from post is that this is really the void for indie films. This is really where projects die. I think it's getting off the ground and it's landing. Flying's pretty easy when it comes to indie films, but once you actually take off and you're actually getting production and you're doing everything, and then when you finally need to wrap it up and bring it all together, those are two of the critical points and critical moments. And I think your mentality has to be incredibly defensive of the post-production process and ensuring you have everything and ensuring you have things. Because if you don't, your only options are either compromise and go ahead and pick up. So do you want to talk about real quick? Because I think any filmmaker out there is going to have an issue similar to this at some point where basically, you're going to be looking at, do you go and do a pickup or do you simply compromise? So you kind of want to walk through both of those, compromising versus pickups, and what the mindset is. Because realistically, if you look at all of our movies, we've essentially done that.
Yeah, I think with pickups, when you're actively looking at doing pickups, you have to ask yourself, well, I think there's probably two different variations of pickups. One, pickups that you absolutely 100% need to get a finished product. The movie is missing a scene or it's missing something, and you absolutely have to get it done to complete a movie. The example for this was a lot of stuff in the Morgan estate was we just could not have a movie unless we did pickups. Then the other, side of the pickup thing that you have to ask yourself is, will this make the movie better? So it might not be a pickup that you absolutely 100% need, but it's a pickup that makes the movie better. Usually these are inserts. For the murder house, we did one where we did a seance ritual with a drink. We had some candles that we did. And we did a couple, smaller pickups as far as like a cop car driving, some cars pulling up and stopping, just some like small glamour inserts. But they're quick and easy, and they do add production value to your movie. So, obviously you want to just not do an absolute ton of them because they do take time. They do take energy. But if you can, ask yourself, and you're like, all right, this little shot here is going to add to the production of the movie, then, those are good pickups to do. But then you get to the point of compromise where it's just, you have to make decisions on just moving forward. If you put enough time into this movie and you've given it, enough love, you just kind of got to get it out there. And I think this is a big mistake that a lot of indie filmmakers make is you could honestly stay editing a movie and doing pickups for the rest of your life. And there has never been a point where I finished a movie and I'm like, oh, it is completed. I could always do something. I could always get another pickup. I could always edit it a different way. Because when you're sitting on the editing table, you have a million choices. It's almost impossible to just figure out which one's the best. So I think a lot of indie filmmakers, especially if this is the only film that they're working on, will just continually edit it until either they just get tired or sick of it, or they just won't even upload it. And I think what happens is like the pressure I'm feeling now, because we have the shapeshifter, there's still a lot of stuff, with the murder house that I'd like to fix or try a different way or get extra pickups. But because we have another feature coming out that needs to be edited, I'm willing to compromise. I think a lot of the stuff that personally bother me right now, a lot of people just skip over because I am a perfectionist. I'm trying to get the best product out to my fans as possible. But I think, are these small little things going to make the movie better? I don't really know. I think they'll make me happy, but whether or not they're going to make a better movie, probably not. And this just comes down to compromise. Am I going to get everything that I want? No, but it's better for me to just do the best job I possibly can on, and then just move on to another movie. So we're continuing the production. We're not slowing down, and we can get these things up to the distribution company and make our money back.
That's really, what it comes down to a lot. And I think the biggest issue is if you don't have that mindset already in place, you're almost going to look at pickups as like, oh, we'll just get this later, or we'll just pick this up, or I'll just do this. And that just extends the schedule so much, that really just does kind of push you further and further away. Which is kind of the first thing I really want to talk about when it comes to the Haunting of the Murder House, because we essentially, when we first started this, we're like, well, we know no matter what, we're going to get at least like 15-20% of this movie is going to be me in a van on the comm system, and then we can get it later on. This allowed us to have a much smoother production because we knew we could push it off till later. But with that being said, it is something that it always kind of gives you a little bit of an excuse not to edit for something. So my big advice, because I know a lot of people who make indie films will have like a very elongated schedule just because you don't really necessarily have enough time for, a full week of shooting, but maybe you can devote like a Saturday here or days here. I would highly recommend looking to do almost kind of what we did with the murder house, or what we try and do with the houses, is get to that finished product, and get to that finished product if it means blocking off scenes, even where it's just like a title block where it says this is this scene, this is this scene. And the reason I mention that is we have a lot of cuts back. So when we're actually making the rough draft and we had to film us in the van, we already had those scenes blocked off to where it would be like, Kel says this, Kel says that, and then it cuts back. And I think if you look to do that, it'll still get you further along there. Because I think the biggest issue that can come about is you just have paralysis, and you're like, well, I only have an individual scene, and you refuse to get that full timeline going because you just say, oh, it's, pickups and pickups. So do you kind of want to talk about the benefit of having the full timeline, and just how that's almost always the goal you need to be working towards?
Yeah, I've talked about it in other, episodes of the podcast, where I think if you're sitting here trying to make each scene as perfect as possible as you're going through the entire movie, you're gonna slow yourself down, you're gonna frustrate yourself. Where my process now is I just do continual cuts. So my first goal is just get something on the timeline. Usually I have something because Kel will have some sort of cut to give me. And so I'll have a full movie on the timeline. And then with each pass, I'll try and get better and better. And I do put a lot of time on individual scenes that, need a little bit more attention. They might be a little bit more technical, but I only give myself sort of a set amount of time. So where I'll try and do it to the best that I possibly can for this set amount of time. And then I'll just move on and go all the way through the movie. And that set amount of time varies. Usually it's just when I get frustrated or I get bored or I just don't want to deal with the scene anymore, I just move on. So for me to go from a rough timeline to a finished product, I'm looking probably about 10 to 15 passes. The passes get quicker and more efficient as the movie gets closer to completion, just because it's not as technical. A lot of the stuff is like, all right, there's an accidental adjustment layer, this thing's reframed, or there's some kind of issue that we just need to pull out and cut it a different way. But I think that it just keeps your momentum going, because if you sit there and you're just trying to get the first 8 minutes of your movie done to perfection, it's going to be very difficult. Because a lot of times, like, I'm did it like last week when I was going through the final cut of the murder house, was sometimes the things that you liked in the beginning of your cuts, in the beginning of the editing process, towards the end, you want to change them out. So there's no saying that, yeah, you can get that first 8 minutes or that first 10 minutes of your movie completed and finalized and perfect, but there's no saying that you're going to actually like how that cut, turns out in 3 or 4 weeks or 6 weeks when you're moving on to, another part of your movie. So I would say keep it flexible, and just keep the momentum going. And when you go start to finish, you do kind of get like a little hit of dopamine because you finished that cut. So I'm like, all right, look, this is cut number 6 is done. Yay, congratulations. Now we move on to cut 7. So I think you're keeping momentum, and that's like the biggest thing, because editing, you can get lost in the depths of, all this footage and all this audio stuff and all these choices. And, you can start to make the wrong decisions, which is why we always talk about getting feedback from it. It's the same thing with screenwriting, where you're just working on something so long that it's hard to see the forest from the trees. And, you need other people's feedback. So I definitely think, like the idea that you should try and focus on is just keeping that momentum and trying to do as many cuts as possible, as opposed to just sitting down, trying to get everything perfect the first time.
Yeah, I think, really that does highlight one of the bigger issues, that I see, which is you get this tunnel vision in editing where you don't really know how to associate yourself with like the project anymore, because you've been through things for so much. And I want to touch on this first, because then I want to kind of go into like how feedback can help this. But as you mentioned, we go through it, we have like 10 15 passes, we go through multiple passes and multiple scenes, and you have so many options, and you just you get to a point where you don't know, is this better, is this worse, which one's better, which one's worse. And before we go into kind of some of the details with this edit, I want to talk about, as an editor, how you can almost kind of be like, like you almost like seeing this project almost kind of slowly hum along, you're pretty pessimistic about it going off to final product. And then typically what I find is, after you watch it again, you warm up to it a lot more. And then the more time you give it, the more you're like, oh, wow. And I have seen this before where a lot of people, right as they're getting to the final finish line, they understand they have to call it. And in the back of their head, there's still so much wrong with it. So I think that natural decision of being forced to compromise causes a lot of despair. And it's just one of the processes that happens because, you might not be ready in the sense of I want to work at it, but you have to go and push it out there. So do you want to talk about just how your mindset shift? Because like, man, I point back to Girl in Cabin 13 after watching it for like the 37th time or something like that. And I was just like, let's go. And then, watching it when it came out for the first time on release, watching it the first time in theaters, all of those times that we rewatched it, it got better and better and better. And then eventually you almost kind of forget that horrible editing process of, creating everything, and you can almost enjoy it. So do you want to talk about that mindset? Because I feel like it is something that we go through every single cycle.
Yeah, I think the cycle, that I see after doing about 10 of these things is when we're getting the footage on set and Kel's editing the footage, everyone's hyped up. The footage looks great. Everything looks good. The audio is great. The actors are jacked up. The performances are great. Then I come back and we get the final rough from the movie, and it's not very good. And then, we have to do probably 5 or 7 passes before I can even get feedback from other people. And I think where the despair that he's talking about comes from is that when you're editing something, there's never good feedback. I never get, hey, that scene was like really, really, really cool. It's just a list of problems, a list of problems, a list of problems. So, going through the editing process, you're getting about 3 or 4 months worth of just problems, and there's no easy solutions to any of this stuff. And so it kind of takes a toll on you mentally. You're just like, man, I don't really know if this movie's very good or not, because I just keep getting problems, and I solve problems, I get more problems. So if you don't know how to handle that, I think it could definitely take a toll on you mentally. It can make you start to doubt whether or not you made a good movie. But I know this process now, and I'm actually eager when I talk to people, when I talk to the super fans, to say, look, rip it apart, because the more stuff you give me now, the more stuff I can address it. Then when you finally get to those final cuts and there's very little notes, that's when it's time to upload it. But I definitely understand, because I've showed different people the different cuts in different points of the timeline. I understand how much of a difference adding color and having proper color and mood and tone to the movie makes, and how much sound, just little sounds, pop scare noises, having good audio, good clean audio, and then finally how much music affects a movie. All these things combined, if you only have 1 or 2 of these things working, your feedback is completely different than the final cut. When you have music, you have clean sound, and you have good audio and good color, the feedback is going to be night and day. And that's why I always struggle with, when do you show people these cuts? Because I want the best feedback as possible, but it's just a lot of people, you can tell them, look, this is not a final color cut. This is, the sound's still going to have issues. There's no music on here. Just ignore that. But to get the feedback that you want, you kind of have to have most of those things ready to go, because as much as you tell people to ignore it, they're not going to. And then your feedback's just going to start to loop back around to, all the technical problems that you're facing.
Exactly that. I mean, it's just a dark place to be. And I think it's dark, especially if you haven't been there before. I think one of the biggest advantages that I hold when I'm doing the rough edit, because I know you always say like, oh, there's a lot of problems with it. Since I've looked through a lot of the footage, and since I have it organized, and since I kind of know what's there or what's not, I can draw back to conclusions I had from like the past movies we've done, because I've seen them in that similar state. So I think that's where I kind of am able to almost kind of make a quicker jump to it. And I think I've learned to kind of dull my edge a little bit. But even myself, you end up watching it, and it's almost like when you type a word too many times and it doesn't look like it's spelled right. you have that effect in your edit. And because of that, you just really, really can't tell where it's kind of at. And typically, as you mentioned, the feedback is going to be negative. So, next thing I want to hop into is really, we have the mindset, and the mindset can be pretty negative. Well, let's talk about the feedback, because the feedback can also be super negative. And this is really, where I think it can pile on a lot of filmmakers is just this post production process. So, a good thing is always getting the feedback, because, like we said, once you get kind of too thick into it, it's hard for you to really kind of be non-biased about what you're seeing, or even kind of be able to look at it because you've seen it so many times. And we now have the super fan community to kind of give us feedback. And I think this is something that, absolutely next level. We'll talk about that in a little bit later on, just to, highlight the difference. But, within most reach of indie filmmakers, let's talk about how you should go about getting the feedback and how you should understand the feedback. Because I think one of the biggest things that we have experience wise is we know how to take good feedback and we know how to identify things. So, if you're an indie filmmaker, obviously friends and family are going to be kind of the first thing, but then you really want to start trying to figure out how you can even discern, who's kind of leaning one way or the other. And unfortunately, you just kind of need multiple reviews. So you want to talk about how when approaching friends and family, you kind of want to discard what their opinions are, understand it's going to be skewed positive, but still look for the technical things. When friends and family is like, I loved it, but this was really kind of weird, or that was kind of odd. And then I think the biggest thing is make sure you always understand when hearing feedback that it's their opinion. Don't take it too seriously, because I think another thing is people are afraid of giving feedback, or at least sending it out there, because they might get bad responses, which can only add to the negativity. So in your opinion, what's the best sources for feedback, and how should you almost kind of take that feedback from each source?
Well, I think for, indie filmmakers, I think you have to break feedback into three different tranches. I think the first tranche is technical. And this is stuff that, like, obviously you have to fix. This is sound issues. This is color issues. If people are like, that blood doesn't look like blood, you have to fix that. If people are like, there's an adjustment layer over here and it's creating weird color, you have to fix that. If the audio drops out here, or it's too harsh, or it's not very clean, you have to fix that. So technical issues are very easy to fix. And, most people it's very rare to find someone who can go in detail and watch your movie and give you a lot of technical feedback. And if you find someone like that, definitely keep them around, because someone who's super detailed is going to find like all these things, and they're very important to find, because you don't want, when you release the movie, people to, bringing up technical errors. You just do not want that. The second tranche is a little bit more difficult, and this is creative feedback. And this is feedback on your story, on your pacing, on a lot of, elements that are just in the creative process. And for this one, I think a lot of indie filmmakers struggle with it, because this film is their baby. A lot of them are writer directors, so they really want to have control over it. So immediately they're uptight to feedback. They don't want to hear about bad characters. They don't want to hear about bad dialogue. They don't want to hear about pacing issues. But I think you really need to listen to feedback, because it can help you fix your movie, but it also can help you get better as a filmmaker in the future. So, I'm always looking for story feedback. When we started to make movies that were good enough to, pass the technical level, and we got, feedback on story and characters, I think that's where you start growing Cabin 13, and all these movies, our momentum just start to pick up, because that feedback I could apply, and I could be aware of issues, moving forward in the screenwriting process. So you definitely do not want to, not listen to feedback there. That being said, it is a lot of people's opinion. Like Kel said, it's your opinion. So what I'm looking for is when multiple things get brought up, like from multiple different people. If someone's saying like the pacing's too slow in this scene, I might think the pacing's fine. I might like it. I think it's fine. But if I go and like 4 or 5 people are like, hey man, the movie really slows down here, or I really don't like this scare, or I really don't like this scene. Um, if multiple people are bringing it up, usually that signals that there's a problem and you should dig deeper. There's a lot of times where I am not my audience and I think something's fine or I like the cut that I made, but 5 or 6 people say no and I have to go back and change it. And once again, that's compromise. Then the third tranche of feedback, which we're getting now, is just on distribution companies and just marketing from top level people who are actually going to go out and push your movie. In the Murder House, I had to make a creative choice to remove some things in an intro scene that I thought were kind of funny, gave the movie like a little bit more fun and humor to it. But knowing how they respond to some of that stuff as far as like tone and mood of the movie from the feedback we got from Girl in Cabin 13, I knew that this probably wasn't a good idea to put it in there. And so it's another compromise that, you have to do, because remember, you're not the one that's going to be selling this movie, and you want to give your movie the best chances to actually succeed. So listening to all 3 tranches of feedback, it's a skill. You have to learn how to do it. The quicker you learn how to do it, the better. And I just think a lot of indie filmmakers kind of struggle with this because it is ego related. You don't want to go out there. You don't want to have your mom and dad giving you bad feedback. You don't want to have your friends giving you bad feedback. You don't want your producers or your distribution companies giving you bad feedback. But it's part of the process. It's part of the process of post. The quicker you can just remove your ego from it, listen to everybody, and just try and make the best product possible. And I look at it now as like all this feedback that I'm compiling, that I'm getting, helps me make a better movie. Because if you ignore this kind of stuff, if you don't, fix it, or if you're like, no, I am correct, I am the one who's doing this, this is my project. Well, when you go out and you actually release the movie, you're going to get a whole bunch of people giving you a whole bunch of reviews that are negative about the same problems that people brought up in post-production. So you can save yourself that, that kind of issues, because once it's, uploaded, you really can't fix it. So I think, taking and understanding feedback, understanding how to compromise it's a skill, and the sooner you can learn how to do it, the better your movies are going to be. And, the better you are going to be as a filmmaker.
Exactly that. I mean, really, the issue to me though comes is it's not like there's too many communities out there that are going to be open to feedback, in the sense of, your friends will probably do it because, hey, they care about you and they might be biased, they might be swayed, but they also have different opinions. But the problem is it's hard to narrow in on things that people really do like, versus things that one person doesn't like or one person thinks isn't there, because that's a sample size of 10 versus a sample size of 100, is completely different. So what's different now with this movie, and I think that's something that's going to be a huge improvement moving forward, is with our Discord community and the super fans we were able to do a very, very like planned and strategic Google form document that allowed us to get data and numbers on very key roles and very key parts of the scenes. And I highly recommend any filmmaker really try and build a community out there of people who really care about movies like they do, because again, they found us because of the movies, they watch our movies, and it's not the easiest thing to do by any means. And, it's something that you have to consistently work at. But do you want to just talk about real quickly the benefit, what it's like as a benefit for you to be able to have a community of people who essentially are the people that, they found us because of this, but they're the ones giving us the feedback? Because I think the biggest shift for me really was, it helped me understand that I'm not necessarily the audience, but our audience speaks loud and clear, and it allows us to see if we have an overwhelming majority with our super fans that clearly we're on the right trail.
Yeah, I think it's super crucial, because I think it's twofold, where number one, this is a community of people who like our movies. So it is our fan base. These are guys are, laser focused. These are the people we want, to market to. These are people that we want to, work with. This is a community that we want to build. So, having those people, because I think a big time problem with indie filmmakers is they just don't know what their audience is. they don't know what genre their film is. So it's like in all these, like it's a romance, sci-fi, horror, drama, which is very difficult to sell because you don't have an audience to begin with. But even if even if they are making a horror movie or a drama or a comedy, they still don't know what their audience is. They don't know who is really going to like their movies. And we're very, very fortunate, very lucky to have a fan base of people who love indie horror movies, and they love the stuff that we're trying to do. So when when you first have your audience built in, the next step is to work with them and see what they like, what they don't like, and improve your product, because this is the product you're going to give to, your fans. I'm making these movies for them. So obviously their feedback is super important. And just to see the scope and the ability of them to give me such valuable feedback, it's made The Murder House such a better movie. I mean, it's really night and day. And maybe I'll take the cut that I gave the super fans, and then we'll show them the actual final cut, and all their feedback, even the little things in there that they brought up, have been changed. And I think the movie is just a million times better. And I think it's a real milestone, because this is feedback that we're going to be able to get with all our movies. And I think that getting your actual fans' feedback and opinions, and getting their feedback to make a better movie is so crucial. And it's going to make us such a better filmmaking company, because even the stuff that I can't change now, I'm actively taking notes on, and I'm making sure I don't repeat the same mistake. Or if they bring up a really good point, or like you should have done this in this scene, or this would have been really cool, and I just can't go back and fix it, I'm going to use it on another movie, or we're going to use it on Murder House 3.0, or Girl in Cabin 14, or anytime we do sequels. So I think that we're very fortunate to have that tool at our disposal. But I think as an indie filmmaker, if you can get even a small amount of people to try and do it, the more feedback you can get, the better your products are going to be. And I think it's something you should definitely focus your time on, because it's going to pay dividends, as you get better as a filmmaker.
Yeah, and really to kind of stress what the main thing I think any filmmaker needs to be looking at, especially nowadays, is building your community. Gone are the days where you can just simply say, I'm a filmmaker, I just make films, and let me pass this to this person, and they pass it over here, and they market it, and they promote it and do everything. You really need to be that one-stop shop of everything for the film industry. And the thing is it's much more easier now. You can create a website super easy. You can create a Discord community is something I highly recommend. It's a great chat. But even on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, all of these social media platforms, you really want to be looking at, because those are your ways to talk to your audience. I mean, if you've listened to our podcast and if you've listened to our videos, we literally talk about the huge difference of finally being able to tap into people who love our movies. Has been just motivation wise, understanding the product, all of these benefits that we've got, and we're because we put ourselves out there. And you really have to put yourselves out there, because the edit, I mean, this was the best time that I've ever had going through an edit with the feedback, because I knew the feedback that was good confirmed things, but the feedback that was not good really highlighted, okay, these are the issues, and here's kind of where we're out there. And we had a very clear breakdown of it. It was super easy for us to, understand that. So, with that being said, we were able to quickly adapt and fix a lot of those pacing ones. But I think the biggest ones that we were looking for was kind of that pacing element to it. One of the most important questions we ask is, would you continue watching this movie? And do you want to explain why pacing and how that's always what we're looking to improve when it comes to the edit and, the feedback, and anything we can do is really just to kind of get that solid pacing we're looking for?
Yeah, I think, as an indie filmmaker, pacing is going to be your biggest hurdle. And unfortunately, I think for most indie filmmakers or filmmakers in the beginning of their careers, and I made the same mistakes too, is your movies just fall flat. The pacing is really off. Scenes that are supposed to be high energy are too high energy. Scenes that are supposed to hit as far as like a beat, a story beat, or just a scare beat to keep the audience interested, are going to fall flat. You're working with actors that are brand new, so it's very difficult for them to create a performance that, immediately captures people's attention. You as a screenwriter are probably not going to be able to write characters that are going to be unique and dynamic and be able to capture people's attention, just in general. You're going to have a lot of technical issues as well that are going to, detract from people just paying attention to your movie. The problem is that where this market's going to is everything's going to be AVOD, which means you're getting paid per advertisement watched. You're getting paid for how many minutes people are watching your movie. If you make a movie that slows down, doesn't have a good intro hook, or, people are just turning off, you're not going to get your money back, and you're not going to get feedback, and you're not going to really, make the next step as easy as you possibly could, as opposed to if you're getting a movie that people are watching all the way through, and that, are leaving reviews and you're getting actual good feedback on. So I think where most indie filmmakers focus on character and character development, and I think that is super critical and super important, your main focus, number one, should always be pacing. And I think horror is a great genre because it's very easy to pace a horror movie, because you can actually just put scares in different locations to make sure that at least every 8 minutes, there's a new tension scene coming up that'll keep the audience engaged. If you're doing a drama or a comedy, it's very difficult to keep that, performance going. And if you're missing on certain beats, or people don't like your characters, or they don't like your lines, you're just going to turn it off. So I think, if you're an indie filmmaker and you don't have, a big Netflix deal or subscription deal lined up with one of these larger services, probably 90% of your movie is going to come from AVOD. And you really want to set yourself up for success with just making sure your movie is paced as properly as possible. And if you have any doubts, it's so much better just go fast as opposed to slow. If you want to go, just go balls to the wall and just go as fast as you possibly can. That's much better than slowing down or trying to make some kind of slow burn movie, because it's going to be very difficult to, number one, sell this movie. And it's just going to be difficult to get feedback from your movie because people are just going to turn it off.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really what your goal needs to be, is captivating people enough to watch in an era where, attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. You're not competing against other movies nowadays. You're competing against YouTube, you're competing against TikTok, you're competing against Instagram, Facebook. Everyone's vying for people's attentions. So it's no longer the days of I bought my movie ticket and now I'm stuck here. Now is the day of, you got to keep moving and you got to really keep pushing it. And that's something we always look for. And that's something that we were always looking for when it came to getting the feedback of, are we capturing your attention? Are we moving forward with this plot? Are we progressing enough for you to continue watching this? So, to me, that's really something where being able to continue to get that feedback, and especially the most important feedback of, would you watch it? If people aren't watching your movie, you're not even at step, 2, really. Step 1, make the movie. Step 2, get people to watch it. And step 3 is get enough feedback that you can improve upon it. The more feedback, the more people watch it, the better you're going to be able to learn from that experience of it. So I think those are all kind of the most important things when it came to this process. But overall, I mean, I think the biggest thing that we mentioned from the beginning is, if you have that editor's mindset, it makes the project so much easier to do when it comes to just, from start to finish, knowing that you don't have these critical issues that you have to face. So, do you want to kind of talk about how, if you end up, with this mindset from the very beginning, it's going to vastly improve your sanity, your mental health, all of this stuff as a filmmaker? Because again, this is really the toughest area. And if you go through a pretty shitty process going through the edit and you get some shitty feedback, you're going to feel pretty shitty. So, do you want to talk about how protecting yourself with that mindset, and then also understanding feedback, is just going to get you to improve? And the best thing to do is understand that this is all for you to improve upon.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you're beginning, I think just a lot of people think that this is going to be like, they're going to go out there and they're just going to make an absolute, Oscar worthy movie. And you might do that. I think the odds are stacked against you. I think, I mean, in my case, I've made 11 movies and I still feel like I'm very, very far away from, being able to tell a story that I want to tell. So I think you just got to, look at it as, I'm so grateful to make another movie. I'm so grateful to just be on set and just have another opportunity to get better. And that's how I view it right now. I think when I'm ready and when everything kind of clicks together, when we get the right cast, when we get the right screenplay, and I shoot a good movie, then I think it'll take the next step and jump. When that, will happen, I don't know. It could happen sooner, it could happen later. I don't think that's for you to decide. I think it's just my job is, all right, when I go and write a screenplay, I want to get feedback on the screenplay and I want to give myself honest feedback so I can become a better writer. And then when I go to shoot a movie, I want to make sure that, I'm giving myself feedback and I'm learning how to be a better DP. And when I'm working with actors I'm doing the best I possibly can. I'm, trying to get better as a director. And then when it comes to editing, it's the same thing. I'm just taking this as another rep, as another practice, to just get better. So, my main goal has shifted from, when I first started saying, all right, look, I'm going to become famous by becoming this director, producer, guy who makes movies, to, all right, my goal is to just get better. That's all I want to do, is to see improvement from movie to movie. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the reviews are going to be better or the movie sells, better than others, because that's really not up to you, whether or not people, really identify with your movie. Because in the publishing business, we do a ton of books, but it's really hard for me to tell, which ones are going to perform better than others. A lot of times it's just people just gravitate to something in your book that they like, and same thing with your movie. Some people are just going to like certain things better than others. But I think it's on you, and what you really should take away is just, did you get better? Did you, are you, when you first started making the movie to when you finished the movie, are you a better screenwriter? Are you a better DP? Are you a better actor? Are you a better editor? And if you can say yes to all of those, or at least if you learn from something or learn from a mistake, then you're in a better position. And I think that's just my goal now. And I think if you throw out the money, you throw out the fame, you throw out the potential of what you could possibly be, and just focus on getting better, your ego is not going to get hurt as much. And I think, just simplifying that mindset, it just will do much better for your mental health state going through this whole process, because it is a grind and you can beat yourself up a lot over it. So I think that would be what I would recommend.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, understanding that the goal is improving, that this is just another one, it really helps out because, like you said, there's a lot of movies that I like from our Hateful Eight that weren't really good performers. And in my opinion, by far are better movies, but you're not your audience, you're not the algorithm, you're not all of these factors that go into it. But these are factors that the only thing you really can control is what you're actually doing. What your process is, how you're going to be working on this, how you're going to be improving. And if you can, continue to show progression there, well, at some point in time, you're going to get that, home run, you're going to get that hit. And that's something that we're continuing working towards. But the biggest thing is, always making sure that it is the better process to it. And, the last thing is, I will say, one thing that we almost impose on ourselves now is the fact that, we always say, make sure you finish a product first, make sure you have the movie done, but it can potentially be beneficial to have these deadlines of stacking up projects when you can execute. Don't have too many, or else you're going to run into the Haunting the Morgan Estate / like the suicide, or the Devil in the Room, like the issue we had there. But do you want to talk about real quickly just kind of how having the deadline of the shapeshifter, we were talking about it at the start of this Zoom, having the shapeshifter just sitting there, ready to kind of get worked on as we're looking at doing an Into the Forest script, is basically saying we need to go back to what we were talking about at the beginning, is that compromise. So do you want to talk about, I think this is something that comes up big time when it comes to writing and also editing, deadlines. Give yourself deadlines, give yourself cuts, because in the creatives, those are usually the ones that make that compromise for you.
Yeah, I think moving forward, I'm going to be more strict on deadlines just for myself. As far as screenplay and screenwriting, usually it takes about 8 weeks to go from initial concept to finished draft of a screenplay. And I just write so much that that's not a problem. Like I've never had a problem where like, oh, this script is taking too long. I think the closest we had was like the shapeshifter script, and it wasn't taking too long. It's just I wasn't happy with how it was going. And it once again turned out not to be a problem. It was non-issue. For shooting, obviously we shoot for 8 days. And you're limited by the amount of time you're in a location. So I don't think that one's going to change. I think moving forward for post production, I think that 3 months is where you want to be. I think it's a solid schedule. And I think we had about 3 months of work on the murder house, but once again, we had the pickups, we shot it during holidays. And, obviously this is not my full-time job. So I had to deal with some other business issues to take care of that kind of interrupted me. But I think moving forward, I think 3 months is a good time for post-production. I think you get 1 month to do, a rough cut. You do a month to get your sound and your, color going, and then take a month to just get feedback from everybody and get it to final upload. And I think that, most indie filmmakers, I think your business model will, do much better if you give yourself deadlines. And if you give yourself a hard deadline, at least you're like working against that, and you're going to feel anxiety. You're going to feel pressure. But that's good pressure, and it'll keep you moving, as opposed to being like, I don't need to work on this for a couple of days, and then a couple of days turns into a week, and then it turns into a month, and all of a sudden you're a year later and you don't have a product. So I definitely think that, for me personally, and what we're trying to do and our goals for the company, we're about 8 weeks for a screenplay from concept to finished screenplay, 8 days to shoot it, and then 3 months to, go through post-production. So I think that that's, where you should be looking. Those don't need to be your actual deadlines, because we're much faster and much more aggressive than a lot of other filmmakers. But I do think the sooner that you figure out how much time you actually need and figure out how to give yourself deadlines, the better your product is going to be, and the more efficient you will be as a filmmaker.
Completely agree. I mean, if it looks at, having those deadlines can serve two things. One, it will force you to do things, but also it is that dopamine hit of achieving it, hitting these milestones, getting those finished products done. And, I've just seen it so much where these things drag on, and like days turn to weeks, weeks turn to month. And, I would say we even experienced a bit more of a drag on this one than normal. I think, because you said, the pickups and the holidays and just business items coming up, and we're always going to have that type of drag until we, really ramp up to a full-time production here. But that being said, we were always kind of had that firm time frame of, okay, we're doing the shapeshifter, we're doing this, we're executing on this, we have it. So now it's like, all right, we got to get it out of here, we got to be done with it. And with that being said, I think the editing mindset again is staying positive. How to stay positive in the post-production element of it is really, really tricky. And how to stay positive when it comes to the feedback is really one of those processings. But one last thing I just kind of want to mention, ending on this episode, because we talk about it so much. This is the hard part for the reason that we say it's the best part. This is the hard part in the sense of it's the most challenging. It is typically the, most depressing in the sense of like, you're kind of forced to get through these issues and see this. And if you have the wrong mindset going into this, if you get the wrong feedback, it's super easy to just not even do this and completely avoid it. I would say the state that we're at, we've learned to just, plow through it. It's not even going to phase us. But as a new editor or a new filmmaker, you just kind of want to have a little almost like pep talk of like, it's supposed to be hard. This is the weight training. This is the training that shitty scene that you filmed that you're having an issue now. Well, guess who's never going to film it like that ever again? It's going to be you. This is the reason why we're getting, better, is because we go through this editing process.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally true. And I think that a good movie is just avoiding mistakes and pitfalls. I think that is how you make a good movie. I think, especially watching a lot of indie movies, they'll be doing well. It's almost like you're walking on like a tightrope, and there's wind blowing on you, and then all of a sudden they hit a scene, they fall off. And I'm like, man, that movie would have been really, really good if they didn't do that one scene. And, now that I have a little bit of experience, I see the scene and I know how it's going to play out in my head. I'm like, oh man, they're going to do like an audio scare in here, and this is just not going to hit. This is going to be very difficult to film. And on the indie level, yes. Or if they go with a monster that needs like high level CGI, I'm just like already, I'm like, oh man, this movie's good. These characters are great. But when they have to go show this monster and or increase the stakes, it's gonna, it's not gonna hit. So I think, understanding the pitfalls of making an indie film and understanding and realizing the mistakes that you made before and just proactively trying to not make the same mistakes is how you make a good movie, is how you get better. All our movies are a combination of avoiding the mistakes that we made before and then finding the stuff that we did really, really well and reusing it. And you'll see a lot of stuff in our old movies that we reused because people said the feedback was great. And there's a lot of scenes that we just threw out. There's a lot of character development that we just threw out. There's a lot of characters that we just threw out because they just weren't good. And that's just how you get better. But I think a lot of people come into this process saying, oh man, I'm going to make all these really, really good scenes. This is how you make a good movie. You write really good things and you film them really well. And this is how you make a good movie. Where I'm the opposite now. I'm like, try and make a movie without having any major pitfalls or major, mistakes or major hard scenes to make. And if you can get through from start to finish without any huge, issues or huge holes or huge mistake scenes, you're going to have a pretty damn good movie. And there's very few of those movies. Yeah, they may not be the greatest movie, but they get you from A to B. You watch it and you're like, you know what? That was a pretty solid movie. And I think that once you start to get to that point as a filmmaker where people are like, all right, that was a good movie. Like that was a solid movie. There's nothing super special, but it was a good movie. If you get to that point, then you can really sit down and figure out, all right, I can make a good movie now. How do I make a great movie? And I think it's just, progression of, learning and making films and just going through this process multiple times. And that's just how you get better at anything.
I mean, that's really it. It's time, it's effort. You just got to do the things that are tough. And then before you know it, you end up getting much, much better. So, it's a very simple process in that sense. But the hardest part is getting through the editing. The hardest part is getting over that finishing line and then taking the feedback and learning from it. So, overall, I think this editing process was kind of a combination of pretty much everything we've learned from the past processes, but then adding in the element of feedback and allowing us to really kind of get a better concept of, this is what it looks like moving forward, being able to set ourselves up from pre-production to production so that post-production is going to be as simple and easy as possible is going to be the way that we really always structure all of our projects and all of our films. So that's going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. We do have one more episode in which we're going to talk about really just kind of our plans for the Haunting of the Murder House, where we're kind of in. Again, it still is kind of up in the air with where we're going, but we just kind of want to let people know how we're looking at potentially monetizing it. We are going to talk about developing a community and specifically a Kickstarter campaign for it as well. So those are going to be the major elements that we're highlighting in the next episode. As always, be sure to check us out online, join our Discord channel. You want to be part of the action and you want to be part of the movies, well, you got to be in the Discord channel because that is where we look. And until then, have a good one.